And Dan, you were finishing up your point as we ran into the break. Let me just I think we've kind of reached the point where both our positions are probably clear to each other and our listeners, and we're not going to change each other's minds on GM and Rick Wagoner.
Do we ever?
Well, occasionally, but rarely.
We agree too.
Yeah. But here's some. I find this fascinating. Caterpillar plant in France, in Grenoble, the workers learned that the company was going to cut 700 jobs, and so the workers took hostage the executives. Why are the French protesting in the streets their economic difficulties, and we're not? Because frankly, the United States and the United Kingdom are being hit far worse than France right now.
Well, I would argue that one of the problems is, you have to have a disaffected group of people who are willing to riot in the streets. And in France's case, because remember, it's been only a couple of years ago that they had the essentially Muslim youth riots in their country where they were burning cars all the time and attacking people.
That was a relatively small area of Paris. It was basically a ghetto riot, but that's not what this is. These are French auto workers taking hostage. Let me rephrase the question. I have a theory about this, and I'd love to share it with you, but I'd love to hear your theory first. Why was it that we had these kind of protests in the 1960s and 70s in the United States and we don't now? Why are people not in the streets here?
Well, I think they have a different sense of entitlement than we do. And I think that's pretty clear, that they think that a lot of things government should provide. I think a lot of Americans think government shouldn't be providing or don't expect government or anybody else. We're much more rugged individualists.
Well, maybe we're coming to a point of agreement here. My take on it, Dan, is that back in the 60s and 70s and even the early 80s in the United States, if you were in college and you went out and protested and you got thrown out of school or you missed a few days or whatever, it didn't mean that you would be $40,000 in debt and unable to finish your college education. College was, free in many states and cheap pretty much every place else. If you were a worker and you were out protesting, and even if you lost your job over it, you could always find another job. 35% unionization, wages were really good. If you were a retired person or you were approaching retirement, you didn't have to worry about losing your 401k because nobody had a 401k in the 60s and 70s. Social Security actually could cover most of the cost of retirement, and most people, not most people, but a significant minority of Americans, maybe a little more than half, had pension programs. And that basically that social safety net provided, and health care. Everybody pretty much had health care back in the day. Again, 35% unionization, 70% of American workers had good benefit plans, had health care, and so people weren't all that freaked out about losing their health care that went along with the job because they could get another job and get more health care. That's the case in France. Nobody's afraid of losing their health care. Nobody's afraid of losing their college education or having to pull their kids out of collge.
Well, they're also not afraid of even losing their job, so you can take a guy hostage.
That's right.
And know that the French system is so screwed up that they want to be fired for that.
That's right. Although I wouldn't say screwed up, I'd say functional.
Well, no, if you take a supervisor hostage, pretty much I can guarantee you, in any company in America, because you would be fired and you should be fired.
Well, the SWAT teams would come in and take you out.
Yeah, and again, I don't have any problem with that. You should not be taking people hostage. I think that's a pretty defensible, bipartisan position.
Well, it's not. I mean, they're not holding guns to these guys.
It doesn't matter if you hold somebody hostage and don't allow them to leave. That's pretty much a felony.
How is this different than the strikes in the 1930s at the GM factories and the Ford factories?
I think that the difference is
where there were very similar things. You'll recall.
I was going to say, we're not in the 1930s. For as much as people keep painting comparisons to that, we're not. There's vastly more of that which you were just talking about, social safety net. We have many more things. People are not in the position they were in the 1930s, where it was easy to you could starve to death, even in this country. You have to work at it between the both government social net and, frankly, private social net, which is pretty extensive, through churches and all. Why are the French more prone to do this? I think the Europeans, in general, like their attitude that they can protest.
Yeah.
And,
And I thought we did back in the 60s and 70s, and now I'm seeing an America of a bunch of cowards. Not cowards like people are cowardice, but people cowed is the word I'm looking for. They're afraid. They're frightened.
We're also more of a law and order society. And one of the big issues, I mean, not to go too far off field, but one of the big reasons why a lot of conservatives are bothered by illegal immigration is, frankly, that it's illegal. It's not that it's not a racial component at all. It's simply they're breaking the law. And I think so. What we're dealing with right now in this country, to go directly to your Vietnam War, 70s protest comparisons, Americans saw that and they said, we don't like that. And so they backed off.
I don't think so. I think that if Americans felt safe right now, if Americans knew that if they lost their job, they still had health care, that if they lost their job, they'd have a year or two's worth of unemployment benefits, if they lost their job, their kids could still go to college for free, that Americans would be out in the streets protesting.
I think every time we have a like WTO protests in Seattle or something like that, nobody wants to go anywhere near such protests because they all look goofy.
Interesting. Okay, Dan Gaynor, businessandmedia.org. Thanks, Dan.
Thank you. Take care.
Good talking with you. We'll be right back.